Welcome back to Squawk Box this morning. Coronavirus deaths in New York State now dropped to its lowest in almost a month over the weekend. Governor Andrew Cuomo planning for a phased-in reopening, beginning with construction and manufacturing as soon as May 15th. That's the good news. The state has also tapped McKinsey to help develop the economic reopening plan. Joining us right now is McKinsey Global Managing Partner Kevin Sneader, who's been joining us now almost regularly with updates on where things stand. But Kevin, given your work with the state of New York, we'd love to understand where you think things really do stand, what this phased-in approach looks like, and when New York City in particular can get back to some semblance of normal.
Well, first and foremost, Andrew, thanks for having me back. I have to say I watched the last segment with great interest, given my daughter is a student at Brown. And the reason I mentioned that is because in a way it sort of gives you a sense of the choices and trade-offs associated with the answer to the question of how do we think about reopening. Now, I'm not going to get in, and may disappoint you, to the whys and wherefores of what the governor would decide. That's his call. And really, when I say we are helping, it's important to understand we're working with a number of states across the country. And in each case, what the decision comes down to is how do you reconcile and ensure that we harmonise the saving of lives with the safeguarding of livelihoods. And so both parts of that are vital to this decision. So the information anyone who's tasked with weighing up the decision to reopen is going to take starts with looking at what's happening to cases, what's happening to hospitalisation. And then it moves from there into a real sense of, and do we have in place what we need to ensure that we can retain the control over this dreadful virus? Do we have the testing, the contact tracing, the isolation, the quarantines? Those are the factors that are being weighed up on the health side. On the economic side, Kevin, as you well know, and as you heard from many people this morning already, there is this reality that the depression that's being created is so vast that it poses a threat that is very severe. And therefore, the sequencing of how you bring back the parts of the economy that are essential and jobs that cannot be done from home. Don't forget, 70% of the workforce has to go to a workplace to do what they are paid to do. They cannot do that from home. So it's reconciling those two factors. Well, Kevin, that's what governors across the country are weighing up.
But Kevin, one of the things I want to try to reconcile a little bit is the fact that it's almost impossible to believe that we are going to have enough PPE, that we're going to have enough testing, enough antibody testing, enough all of the steps that we're talking about, that we're going to get most of that in time to, quote unquote, reopen the way you would in an ideal scenario. And there's a lot of people in this country saying, you know what, we're hurting and we're willing to take a risk, maybe a health risk that we wouldn't have otherwise been willing to take, but we think that risk is worth it relative to the economic pain that we're taking. We can debate that whole idea and what the right approach is. But the question I'd ask you is, as you think about that and you think about these reopening and phase-in steps, when you say, like, people want to open a restaurant. Yes, a lot of people, by the way, their job is in a restaurant. But if the restaurant's only 50% open, you're only going to have, I imagine, 50% of the staff.
Well, we're not going to be living in a perfect world for quite some time to come, Andrew. And therefore, I think waiting for an ideal moment is a tough wait for anyone to take. It's a question of how we think about the portfolio of measures that are going to be in place, the role of PPE, the role of testing, the role of contact tracing, and doing it in a way that actually allows the economy to get back to work is clearly a tough call. This is not a land of easy decisions, a yes, no. It's a very nuanced decision. It's a difficult decision. But I think to make that choice, you do have to look also at the economic side. And that is why when you give the example of a restaurant, let's remember that up to 1/3 of the US workforce is at risk of unemployment or furlough. 1/3. That's a lot more than we've seen so far. And of that, about 40% of those most at risk work in restaurants, hospitality, or non-food retail. That's a huge number of people. So to bring that group back, you're right. We have to think about social distancing in the restaurant context. We have to think about how you manage the number of people, the way you think about putting Perplex up, plastic to seal people off and isolate them within a restaurant so that you don't have large groups. All that needs to be done. And why does it need to be done? Because it's not just a question of being able to reopen. It's a question of people feeling confident to go back to the restaurants. So that's why this is not a yes-no answer. And it's why I think you're going to find that different restaurant owners make different calls as to when to reopen and how to reopen. And as we work with larger enterprises across the country, they're faced with that decision in very large environments where they do need to think about how do they ensure that there's enough testing, enough contact tracing in place to be confident that they're not going to reopen and then have to shut again. Because the real test of leadership is now coming. And that test of leadership is to actually bring an economy back up. It's easier to shut down than to bring it back up.
Hey, Kevin, you mentioned that your daughter attends Brown University and you were watching the interview with the president of Brown University very closely, with the understanding that you may not, even if things reopen, you may not be able to stay there. The kids maybe get sent home again. I just looked it up. Brown University, tuition $55,000, a little bit north of that. Is it worth it if your kid's learning online by the end of the semester? Well,
she's learning online now. I mean, she's sitting on that couch actually learning even as we speak.
And is it worth the tuition?
I think it's worth the tuition because at the end of the day, she's getting an incredible education from a wonderful institution. And I don't say that lightly. I think you should also have a look at the kind of support they're providing right now to try and make the best of the online experience. Is it the same as the full educational experience of being on campus? Of course it's not. But for my daughter and for many other people who are in the same position, they're still getting together. It's amazing to watch what they're doing. And she wants to get back on campus. And she, I think, has a sense of the trade-offs associated with that decision. You were talking about, what it will be like to be in a group environment. How do you think about the risk of being reinfected? That's what all these students are going to have to weigh up, and their parents too. So we're having those conversations, but I can tell you she wants to go back.